We've got some moderately interesting call-ups this week. Some players returning to the majors for at least the second time this year. Whole bunch of FAAB suggestions for you on today's RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, Saturday FAAB edition. Erik Halterman here with Ryan Boyer. And Ryan, we've got a whole set of pickups this week. Not, I don't think, one of the most exciting weekends, really just to bum everybody out in minute one of the show. This is going to be a boring one. No, not quite. I think we're going to have a decent number of names, at least one or two call-ups, but probably not shaping up to be a weekend where people are throwing a quarter of their budget at anybody.
Yeah, probably not a big FAAB spending week, but there are some interesting names, especially depending on what your needs are for your roster. I think you can find some guys to pick out that you might like.
Yeah, hopefully we will help you do just that over the course of the next hour. But as always, we want to get started with some of the headlines. And let's start with some issues in the Miami rotation. And that's a new one. Haven't heard any of those yet this year. The latest are two more injuries. We've got Jesus Luzardo is on the IL with a stress reaction, a lumbar stress reaction in his back. Not sure the exact timeline there, but it looks like 4 to 6 weeks is the typical timeline for that kind of injury. So not going to see him for some time. And also now Braxton Garrett, not sure on the exact timeline for him. So far as of recording, he's been scratched from his scheduled start Sunday with elbow discomfort, but not yet placed on the IL. You remember Garrett was dealing with injuries earlier this season, but it was shoulder back in spring training. So Marlins digging deep. Are they now down to about SP 12 or 13 on the depth chart?
Yeah, they have fielded quite a rotation IL to this point. Luzardo is I don't know if you mentioned that he spent time on the IL too earlier this season.
Right.
Flexor strain, came back and made a handful of pretty good starts, but now the back issue and 4 to 6 weeks. I don't know if the Marlins officially said that or if a beat writer said that that's generally the timeline you're looking at for that type of injury. So, best case scenario, he's still going to be out until after the All-Star break. I think shallower leagues, it's probably okay to cut him if you need that roster spot. He might be the type of guy you could cut, and then if it looks like he's trending in the right direction, maybe you could add him back later on. But obviously an up and down season for Luzardo. I think a lot of people who had rostered him were hoping for a trade at the deadline to a good team that would have his fantasy arrow pointing up, but that probably is, I guess, could still happen, but probably not. I know Craig Mish, Marlins insider, tweeted out that he does not expect that to happen now. They certainly don't need to do it right away. He's still under team control for 2 more years after this, I believe. So, yeah, and Braxton Garrett, obviously not as high of upside, but you add a shoulder injury or add an elbow injury to a shoulder injury. He's an obvious cut if he's not, if he's still on your roster. He's more of a floor guy than a ceiling guy anyway. But yeah, I guess if there's a silver lining, they pretty much have to call up Max Meyer back up now, right? They're just so desperate for arms. It seemed like they were going to bring him back soon anyway, but now they really have no choice.
Yeah, I would have thought that they had no choice but to call up Max Meyer when the remaining alternate options were Rodri Munoz, Yanni Chirinos, and Sean Anderson. But all of those guys are currently in the Marlins rotation, and they still need another guy. So if it's not Max Meyer now, I mean, when? He's still only going like 4 innings in his minor league starts. I believe he just pitched 2 days ago, so he's not going to be an option for replacing Garrett on Sunday. But certainly, we didn't throw him on the outline as a pickup this week because I feel like we've talked about him every single week of, hey, you should probably get him because he really should be back in the majors soon. That's more true than ever this week. Everything we've said about Meyer in the past, just double it at this point. I don't understand why he isn't back there. I guess the Marlins don't really care about putting their best 26 players on the roster at this point. They're not playing for anything, but even so, what's Meyer learning in the majors or in the minors that he couldn't learn in the majors in a season that's already a lost season? Let him face the best hitters in the world and see what looks there.
Yeah, and I think Skip Schumacher said, it's been 2 weeks ago probably, that he expected to see him soon. I know it's a vague timetable. Like you mentioned, hasn't gone more than 4 innings since being sent back down. I assume they're going to let him stretch that back out once he comes back to the majors, especially since they're, really going to be starved for innings. I still think even with the somewhat uncertain status that Max Meyer definitely still makes for an obvious stash if he's still available.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'd be more interested in picking him up than I think any of Munoz, Chirinos, or Sean Anderson, unless you've seen anything with those guys that I haven't.
Munoz has, I know he has, I forget who wrote this, but I saw something about him he was one of however many starters that has a couple pitches with a whiff rate of like 33% or higher. So he's shown some flashes of stuff, but the results have been mixed at best. And he's not really much of a prospect. Hadn't put up great numbers in the minors either. So not terribly interested.
Elsewhere in injury news, we have Gabriel Moreno landing on the injured list with a sprained left thumb. He did not have a broken thumb. X-rays came back negative, but he does have a sprain. Not sure the exact timeline for him. Just going to be Tucker Barnhart or Jose Herrera as the catchers in Arizona, and I would imagine neither of them deserves much of a mention even on this FAAB show.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Moreno has not been that much better than those guys this season. He's a guy I liked to come into the season, but that little power burst he had towards the end of last year didn't carry over to this year, and we're counting on him to at least hit for average at a position that doesn't have much of it at all, and he hasn't really done that either. So, a sprained thumb, that's generally at least a month plus. And if you're holding on to Gabriel Moreno, go ahead and cut him loose. And there's no reason to wait that one out.
Yeah, the upside with Moreno just not that high. He was supposed to be, I would think, mostly a high floor catcher who, like you said, hits for a high average because he makes a ton of contact. He's still making a ton of contact this year. 15% strikeout rate is quite good, but hitting just 230 and his expected batting average of 240 doesn't leave much reason for optimism, and no real power, just 3 homers. So I think not worth waiting this one out. I'd agree with you there. More injury news. Starling Marte left a game today with a right knee injury. We don't yet know the severity of that, but given Marte's age and his own injury history, certainly would not be surprised if this develops into something bad enough that it needs a trip to the IL. I think as of right now, if I had Marte on my roster, I'd be making sure I had enough outfield coverage come Monday.
Yeah, and they said that it's been something that's been nagging at him for a couple weeks. He's had some off days mixed in. I guess apparently in hindsight, that's maybe due mainly to the knee issue. He's been productive from a fantasy perspective. I think whoever spent a late-ish round pick on him has been fairly pleased. But as you mentioned, the nagging injuries with him are troublesome, certainly. At least the groin stuff that he had been battling the last couple of years, that hasn't really popped up this year, but now he might be replacing that with a nagging knee issue. So not ideal, but hopefully it's something that he can continue to play through. But I agree with you that you should definitely have a contingency plan in place.
And then finally, wrapping up our headline section today, some more injury news, but it's on the positive. A couple positive notes for the Rangers, who have not had a great time trying to get back to the playoffs after winning the World Series last year. They've had a few injuries and some underperformance, but they'll be getting some key players back. Josh Young is going to return from his broken wrist on Monday, it looks like, and Max Scherzer will be making his season debut after dealing with back and thumb issues. That will be coming Sunday. Originally looked like it might come Saturday, bumped back a day, but no suggestion as far as I can tell that there's any setback there. Just wanted to align the schedule slightly differently. So Max Scherzer, what do you think would be a fair set of expectations for him going forward this season? I don't know if anybody's going to throw out any challenge trades before we see him out there, but what would you expect if you have him on your roster? You've been waiting this long. Do you think you're going to get, a fantasy ace or number 2 while he's in there?
I think it's reasonable to expect like a number 2 as long as he's out there. I worry about the nagging injuries. Like they've been more and more of a problem for him the last couple of years, and given his age, that stuff is probably not going to go away. And it didn't really seem like his last issue with was it a nerve problem? It didn't really seem that was like solved. But it just became good enough to where he could give it a go. But as long as he's on the mound and pitching, I think he's probably going to be effective. What was he stretched out to in the minors? I think his last start was maybe 5 innings.
4 2/3. So
4 2/3. So yeah, probably not more than 5 this first go round. So if you don't have the opportunity to activate him right away, I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep over that, because he's not going to be able to pitch super deep into his first start anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think as long as he's on the mound, he's still going to be pretty effective. Just the ceiling isn't going to be what it used to be.
Yeah, no indication from Scherzer's rehab starts that he is bound for any immediate troubles. 17 strikeouts against 3 walks in 11 innings across those 3 outings. So it looks like Max Scherzer. Let's jump straight into our priority FAAB buys of this weekend. We got a handful of hitters to start off with. You've got probably the most interesting guy of the week, I would say, to kick things off. Somebody who might get some big bids in various leagues. Who is it?
Yeah, Ben Rice, called up by the Yankees. Anthony Rizzo, they're saying 8 weeks. He's going to miss with a broken forearm. They've already moved him to the 60-day IL, so it's not going to be something he can magically come back from super early. Ben Rice at between double and triple A this season, 275, 393, 532, 15 home runs, and also 9 stolen bases. Big thing is he's catcher eligible. He's played only first base for the Yankees, kind of split between catcher and first base in the minors. I don't know that he's going to play any catcher for the Yankees, or at least not this season. But that's probably a good thing for fantasy. It's going to keep him in the lineup more often at first base. Left-handed hitter at Yankee Stadium. He also showed fly ball and pull tendencies in the minors, so you can take advantage of that short porch in right field. Kind of a B-level prospect, I would say. He's not a top 100 guy or anything, but that's a pretty good system that the Yankees have. So just because he's not like a top 5 guy doesn't mean he's not a good prospect. That catcher eligibility, again, is just super enticing. Looks like he's going to be getting a good amount of run at first base. The Yankees, if it doesn't work out, they could easily move DJ LeMahieu to first base and put Oswaldo Cabrera back at third base. But I think they're going to let Ben Rice show what he has, at least for the next few weeks. And not a guy to break the bank for, I don't think, for FAAB, but I would be interested in putting some bids in on him if I'm in need of catcher help, and I am in a couple leagues. So I don't know, 5, 6, 7-ish.
Yeah, I would think at least. I mean, maybe given that he hasn't really done too much in his 4 games so far, that will keep 5, 6, 7 an appropriate number. With all catchers, it's a little bit tricky because if there happen to be 3 people who need a catcher this week in your 2-catcher league, well, then, yeah, there's competition that'll drive up the bidding. And Ben Rice, probably very interesting to whoever lost Gabriel Moreno this week, for example. But sometimes there's just, nobody else needs a catcher this week. And so you can sneak him in pretty cheap. And I think that Ben Rice, for me, I would not yet be all that interested if my league doesn't count him as a catcher. He, I think, is going to count as one in most places. But if your league, for whatever reason, has him as a first baseman, because that's what he's playing in the majors, I don't yet think I would run out and add him any of those leagues, because he's one of those difficult prospects where, is the glove good enough for him to catch? Probably not. And is the bat good enough for the profile to work if he moves out from behind the plate? We're not sure yet. It might be. With a lot of these guys, it does end up being more than enough, and they have long careers as first baseman. We never think about them as catching again. That could certainly be Ben Rice, but we don't know that yet. And so I think I'd be only interested in leagues where I need a catcher, but in those leagues, I think there's enough bat that I'd be taking a chance. So
yeah, and go ahead, and it requires a little extra work on your part, but canvass your league to see, try to make your best guess as to who might be putting bids on catchers that week. I mean, it's like I said, it does take a little more time, but you could wind up saving yourself a good amount of FAAB, or you might have a better idea how much it might actually take to land him. So just do a little research. Yeah,
because that's a good call. Because I don't know. I mean, let's say you're not in desperate need of a catcher, just your second catcher isn't that great. He's been you drafted him as the 25th catcher off the board, and he's been the 25th catcher. I don't know who exactly that guy would be, but if you're in that situation, are you seeing Ben Rice as an upgrade, or is he only if you've lost a catcher, that kind of guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly worth a roll of the dice. And if you're digging that deep in a 2-catcher league, even though he hasn't done much at the plate so far, I think there's enough upside there to warrant an exploration bid, at least.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'll go to my first hitter of the day. It's Jared Kelenic. He is going to be still owned in all your very deep leagues, but in the shallower leagues, I think he was probably drafted in most of them early in or throughout draft season, because he was not quite a sleeper. Was he a sleeper? I don't know. He was interesting enough after his move to Atlanta, given his past prospect pedigree. Everybody wants to be there when Jared Kelenic finally figures it out, and we're not yet at a place where we've decided that he's never going to figure it out. So he was probably drafted a whole lot of places and then dropped in those shallower leagues early in the season because he was not off to a very good start. But he's been playing much better lately. He's also playing every day now that we have no Ronald Acuna. Recently, Jared Kelenic has become the everyday center fielder and leadoff man, occupying that spot even against lefties. If he continues to get tons of playing time against lefties, maybe we worry that his numbers go down, but mostly excited about that extra playing time. In the month of June, he's got a 131 WRC plus. That was after having just a 100 in April and an 89 in May. I'm not yet saying this is the breakout for Jared Kelenic or anything, but if you were worried that he was not really shallow league worthy early in the season, I think he definitely is now, given the way he's playing and given how often he's playing and where he's in the lineup. So definitely think I see pointed out here, he's only 7.5% owned on ESPN. I think he doesn't need to be 80% or anything like that, but I think he should be a lot higher than that. I think to the Jared Kelenic we're seeing now, it's a lot closer to the person that was drafted. And so if he was interesting enough to be drafted in your league, go pick him up if he's been dropped.
Yeah, and Acuna obviously done for the season, and the grade 2 hamstring, I believe, strain for Michael Harris. So it's going to be several more weeks for him on the shelf, you presume. So he's going to get a nice run in that leadoff spot. One guy hitting lower in the order now, probably due for a rise up higher in the order, is Zack Gelof. Mostly been a flop this season after looking really good his rookie year, but hit a home run in 3 straight games. Before that streak was snapped on Friday. And, as bad as he's been as far as like his rate stats go, still has 8 home runs and 8 stolen bases, and that's with 3 missed weeks with an oblique injury. So he hasn't been a complete zero from a counting stats perspective. Has been hitting lower in the A's lineup, as I mentioned, but that has recently ticked up from 8th or 9th up to 7th. It's not much, but I know Abraham Toro has been banged up. I don't know if he actually went on the IL or he went. I feel like we had an update on him recently. He's dealing with a shoulder issue.
He did hit the IL, yes.
He did hit the IL. Okay, so I don't know where Gelof is hitting today. If A's have released a lineup yet, but maybe a potential move up to the leadoff spot, at least part time. And like I mentioned, maybe the rate stats aren't going to be great, but still offers some power, some speed. Second base isn't great. So if Zack Gelof is on your waiver wire and been dropped, I think he's worth picking back up. And because those numbers still aren't great, probably not going to take a whole lot. I mean, 3 or something might be enough to get it done.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I'll just throw in that he did not move up to the leadoff spot today. He's still batting 8th, unfortunately, but I still get behind this Zack Gelof mention. I think, as you said, the power and speed have still been there, striking out too much, but not quite as much as he was early in the season. I think if you just look at Zack Gelof, combine his last year's numbers with this year's numbers, he was playing above his head last season, and he's playing worse than we know he can this season. Combine it, you've got 530 plate appearances with 22 homers, 22 steals, and a 237 average. That seems like a pretty fair set of expectations for him going forward. He's a 20-20 guy, maybe a 25-25 guy with a bad batting average, but not necessarily a bottom of the scale one that's going to crush you completely in that category. So I think that's going to work in plenty of leagues. I'll go rather boring here. Are you ready to take a little bit of a nap? Carlos Santana. Yeah, 38-year-old DH, still doing it. Not bad for somebody who came up as a catcher back in 2010. Santana, I'm not about to tell you he's a new man and super exciting or anything like that, but he's been getting a little bit more attention in the shallower leagues, and I think he is usable in much more than just the deep leagues. Santana looked like maybe just a deep league compiler, somebody you throw in your corner infield spot if you have to, because, he's 38 and he had been trending the wrong direction over the last few seasons. He had a below average batting line in both 2020 and 21. And then the last 2 seasons, he had exactly a 101 WRC plus, which technically an above average hitter, but that's not enough for a first base /DH. So if you assumed he was going to keep trending that way in his age 38 season, I would have been right there with you. But you look at his numbers right now, hitting 247 with 12 homers in 70 games. Strikeout rate just shy of 15.5% is the best it's been since 2018. Doesn't hit the ball that hard, but a 7.6% barrel rate is right in line with his career StatCast era numbers. Of course, his career extends well before the beginning of the StatCast era, and hey, he's been hitting the ball better lately. When you're playing all the time and you're a solidly above average hitter, even if you're 38 years old and pretty boring, you're going to have some much more fantasy viability than it seems like on the surface. So I think even in those shallower leagues, if you are in need of a corner guy, Carlos Santana, a lot more worth of pickup than you would think. So not going to have to do too much of a bid on him, probably, because he's just Carlos Santana, but a nice little 2 to 3%, I think he can really solidify your corner spot.
Yeah, and Alex Kirilloff, has not worked out. He's now back in the minors, I believe, or did he go on the IL? Either way, he's not on the roster anymore. So that kind of clears more playing time for Carlos Santana. So clear path to playing time and not super exciting, as you mentioned, but especially if you're in an OBP league, he's definitely worth rostering.
Kirilloff was sent down and then hit the IL, so you were actually
that's
both
right.
counts.
Oh yeah, he covered both. They rescinded that option and then put him on the IL.
Yes.
So he gets to collect a heftier paycheck, but it still missed time. So good for him. Garrett Mitchell, a little more exciting. On his rehab assignment, 3 home runs, 2 stolen bases in his first 8 rehab games. I believe one of those home runs was inside the Parker, so he can still run fast, in case you were wondering. Activation probably coming soon. I know they mentioned that they want to keep him at AAA Nashville for a little bit longer, kind of knock a little more rust off as he comes back from the fractured finger, I believe. Also missed 4 months last season with a shoulder issue. 5 home runs, 9 stolen bases, and 141 career plate appearances at the big league level. He's always been a guy who's a super good athlete, hits way too many ground balls, so he can't quite take advantage of his decent raw power. But in that park, he's going to run into a handful of home runs and mainly a stolen base option. So I think Garrett Mitchell is interesting. It's a fairly crowded outfield in Milwaukee, but Sal Frelick has not been great. Jackson Chourio has not been great. I think there's room for Garrett Mitchell to play quite a bit, at least against righties. So I think he's worth a roster stash, and he's not the type of guy you're going to need to spend a whole bunch for, especially since he's not been activated yet. So you might be able to get away with just a minimum bid for him and then reap some rewards later on.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting guy. As long as he gets the playing time, I think I'd be happy to have him on my roster. Let's go to one final hitter here, Joey Loperfido. And there was some Joey Loperfido excitement in the chat here from Uncle Ted, calls him a must roster. I don't know about must roster for Joey Loperfido. Still a player with some flaws for sure, but he's getting a chance again. He didn't really do anything wrong with his previous chance. It just no longer had room for him on the roster. I guess he struck out way too much. His strikeout rate's still 38%, but he has a 925 OPS through his first 16 major league games. Loperfido was just recalled on Friday. Came back with 2 doubles in a 3-hit game yesterday. He's getting some opportunities for now. Kyle Tucker's injury, certainly a part of that. When Kyle Tucker returns, obviously Loperfido will not be starting over him, so he'll be forced to fight for playing time against the likes of maybe Mauricio Dubon or John Singleton. Certainly a chance that Loperfido beats out those guys and has a roster spot long-term. He's somebody who really added to his prospect pedigree with a very strong start to the season at AAA this year. Didn't have quite the same flashy power when he was demoted back there at the tail end of last month, but still has 13 homers in 39 AAA games with a 933 OPS. 28% strikeout rate at that level means that there's every reason to believe he's going to have a strikeout rate in the 30s in the majors. So he's really going to need to get to his power to make up for the lack of whiffs. And the long-term playing time outlook is questionable, but there's enough here with Loperfido that a guy hitting the ball this hard, surrounded by a pretty decent lineup, I want to see where this goes if I have the ability to add him. Certainly if I need an outfielder, he's going to be in there in the short term, so he's fine. And if I'm in a situation where I'm wanting to speculatively add talent for the second half and don't need too much right away, Loperfido is certainly one of the guys who would fit that bill. I'm not sure you need a huge bid for him, even though he's been up before. Sometimes when guys come up and get demoted, people are just a lot less excited about them, even if they didn't do much wrong to earn that demotion. So still probably going to need a real bid, but not a huge one. You think maybe 3-4%? Is that going to get it done?
Yeah, I think in most leagues that would probably be enough. And, you mentioned Kyle Tucker. That recovery from the shin contusion is really dragged on. I know one of the beat writers from MLB.com, Brian McTaggart, tweeted out that he's still walking around with a limp and hasn't resumed baseball activities. I somewhat jokingly tweeted out that we're going to find out in like a week that Kyle Tucker probably has like a hairline fracture in that leg, and that's why it's taking so much longer. Sometimes those things do happen when recoveries kind of drag on, but either way, even when Kyle Tucker does come back, I think there is a potential path for playing time for Loperfido if he does hit. Moving on to pitchers, Jonathan Cannon of the White Sox. Among White Sox young pitchers, I wasn't super excited for him. Was more looking forward to see what Drew Thorpe could do. Drew Thorpe actually had a pretty good start today, but struggled otherwise. Even Nick Nastrini, I thought, looked like he had a little more upside than Jonathan Cannon. I still believe that to be the case, but Jonathan Cannon has pitched really well. Came one out shy of a shutout his last time out against the Astros. Prior to that, he gave up 1 run, struck out 7 over 7 innings against the Mariners, sitting on a 3.34 ERA, and that's virtually matched by a 3.38 xERA. The stuff isn't overwhelming, but really good sweeper. 160 expected WOBA. If you go by the StatCast run value, that ranks in the 95th percentile for that pitch. Like I said, not a super high strikeout guy. Don't really think that that's going to change. I mean, he's not a hard thrower, but he has that one really good pitch and has been throwing strikes. Doesn't play for a good team. Doesn't play in a great pitcher's park, so there's marks against him certainly, but I think Jonathan Cannon is worth rostering even in your mixed formats at this point. And I don't think you're going to need to spend a whole bunch. I think if he winds up going for more than even 1 or 2, you probably just shouldn't bother, but I think he's worth at least that much of a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you on not wanting to go too far on Cannon. Just not a ton of strikeouts means I'm not too excited about his upside. I think even if he does keep having some success, it won't be the type of pitcher that I'll feel like I really ought not to have missed out on. I think he may well have a pretty solid rest of the season, but there's also the risk in that Mike Clevenger is not too far from returning from an elbow injury. When he comes back, the White Sox could go to 6-man, or they could bump Cannon from the rotation, or they could bump Chris Flexen or Drew Thorpe. I mean, it's not like they're top-tier competition here. So Cannon, if he pitches well, probably will remain in the rotation, but it's not quite a lock, I suppose. My next starter here, DJ Herz, also has some risk of falling out of the rotation, but in Washington, the competition is not that strong, so Hertz could have the chance to stick around even if the team gets healthier. Trevor Williams still out with a flexor strain. Also, Josiah Gray out with the elbow injury, although he's making his rehab start. So here's the risk with Hertz is that he could get bumped from the rotation. The other risk with Hertz is he might not be all that good. He's made 4 major league starts so far after being not a huge prospect. And in 3 of those 4 starts, he failed to complete the 5th inning. One of them, just this one yesterday, was at Coors Field, so maybe give him a bit of grace for that. The reason Hertz is on here, though, is because in that other start, he struck out 13 Miami Marlins, walked 0, allowed 1 hit and 0 runs in 6 innings of work. And yes, it was the Marlins, but still a major league team. I don't want to get ahead of myself with Hertz. Again, most of what he's done so far has been bad. And if you look in the minors, he strikes out a lot of batters, but he also walks a ton. This looks like the kind of prospect who either takes a few years to figure it out or pretty quickly moves to the bullpen. The downside here is very real with Hertz, but the strikeout stuff is great. If you look at his strikeouts and walks so far through 4 starts, it's a 32.5% strikeout rate against a 6% walk rate. That led to a 280 Sierra, a 301 xFIP, a 306 xERA. So there's some really interesting signs here for Hertz mostly just because the lefty's so good at missing bats. I don't think you'll have to bid too much on him now that he got knocked around at Coors Field, and that 13 strikeout gem isn't the most recent thing in everyone's memory. And, there's the risk that he's not in the rotation 2 weeks from now. So that should keep the bids manageable. But it's a situation where if I can add him, again, as a luxury ad, there's a chance that there's some real upside here, I think, unlike with Cannon, because Hertz can really miss bats. So probably only a 3%-ish bid and with some real downside. But the ceiling here is actually very interesting.
Yeah, I think he was, during last week's show, he was in the middle of that 13 strikeout game. So he didn't quite make the waiver wire ads for last week. But, as you mentioned, because of that, understandable, I think, kind of clunker at Coors Field, it's probably not going to cost as much to get him if he's still out there in your league. And everything you said is accurate. I mean, he could be out of the rotation in a week or two. He could just walk too many guys to make the swing and miss stuff worth it. But there is some sneaky upside with him. Moving on to a reliever, Chad Green actually doesn't have a save yet since Jordan Romano and Jimmy Garcia went down, but John Schneider made it pretty clear that he would be his preferred option to pick up saves for the Blue Jays. And we learned today that Jordan Romano had a setback with the elbow. I believe he was supposed to throw off the mound either today or tomorrow, but felt something in the elbow again doing long toss and has been shut down for the time being. He's also on the IL for a second time with an elbow issue, so that's never great. And, Jimmy Garcia is probably going to be ahead of him in the pecking order when he does come back. He's been really good this season, but he's coming back from an elbow injury of his own, so it's not too difficult to envision Chad Green winding up staying in this closer role for longer than they initially anticipated. Not getting whiffs like he used to back in his heyday with the Yankees, but, I mean, he was so good during that stint with the Yankees that he could regress a little bit and still be a very effective reliever, and he has been. 1.72 ERA, 0.89 WHIP. I think he can be, even if the ceiling might not be quite at what it was pre-Tommy John surgery, still perfectly capable of holding down a closer job. Chad Green is, and he could wind up keeping that for longer than expected. And especially since he literally has 0 saves since he was unofficially handed the closer job, I don't think it's going to take much to get him from a FAAB perspective, but, throw $4 or $5 out there and you could wind up with a closer for the next few months.
Yeah, I think we're at the point in the season where maybe we shouldn't project any closer on a bubble team beyond the final day in July. I think there's every chance that Chad Green gets traded. Maybe he's setting up for the Yankees in August and September. Who knows? But I think that you can pretty confidently say that you're bidding on 5 weeks of saves, at least with Chad Green, and that's pretty good. If you're in a situation where you're scrounging for saves, let's deal with July's saves now, and then we'll deal with August saves at the deadline. So I think Chad Green definitely makes a lot of sense. I think I would put Green ahead of the reliever that I am going to here to wrap out our priority ads. That's Ryne Stanek, who's actually gotten most of the recent saves for Seattle. Andres Munoz keeps pitching early in games. Ryne Stanek keeps getting the actual saves. Not the saves leader for the Mariners just yet, but he's up to 7 on the season. And we're reaching a point where, any given save, the next one, it's not that shy of a 50% chance that you give it to Stanek, I would think. The problem here is he's not actually that good. There's nothing special. If you look at most of his numbers, 3.68 ERA, 1.26 WHIP. It's a good pitcher, not a closer, but that's a fine 7th or 8th inning guy. 26% strikeout rate, 8.5% walk rate. That leads to a 340 Sierra. That's fine. 398 xFIPS. The ERA estimators just have him as a mid to high threes kind of guy, as does his ERA, is not a shutdown reliever. If the system that the Mariners use makes more sense back when they had Paul Sewald to go with Andres Munoz. So you go one guy as the fireman who handles the toughest part of the order in the 6th, 7th, or 8th. And then you also have somebody who doesn't look out of place in the 9th inning, getting the 9th inning. I don't think Stanek looks right in the 9th. I think he does look out of place. And I think you'd only add him for the saves. And I don't know for sure that you're getting the next save because he's in that weird position. But given the recent uptick in saves, if you're someone who definitely needs saves, I think you have to prioritize Stanek. I think probably behind Chad Green, but I think he's one of the better options there. I think I'd rather say go to him than try to take a shot at the Cubs bullpen and hope that you can identify the next man up there, for example. So I think I'd still go Stanek for maybe a 3%-ish bid, but only really teams where I could look at the standings and say, hey, if I get a bunch of saves from here on out, I'm really going to move. And I can afford to start someone who isn't even necessarily the primary option.
Yeah, this is why many of us, myself included, were a little worried about rostering Andres Munoz going into the season. As much as we like him as a pitcher, Scott Service just doesn't commit to that old school traditional closer role. And I think, probably to the benefit of his actual team results on the field, but he can make for a headache for fantasy managers for sure. And like you mentioned, Ryne Stanek, nothing special. There's a reason why he didn't sign until I think after spring training started, it seemed like, or later on in the offseason. But he's always missed some bats and, yes, some control issues, but saves are saves, and he's definitely the maybe 1A to 1B, or at least B to A, or however you want to break it down. He's getting some saves and isn't terrible. So, and he's pitching for a team that has a bad offense and a really good pitching staff, so that's naturally going to lead to a good number of saves. So, yeah, I think
that's a good point. $2
or $3 of FAAB for Ryne Stanek is perfectly fine.
Yeah, one final name I'll mention here before we move on from the priority section. Noelvi Marte, I think we mentioned him the last few weeks, but it is next week that he will get to return from his PED suspension. So if he's still out there in your league, I think he's good enough to be added pretty much everywhere. We're going to move on to our budget ads after this message and a brief little game, actually, from Pick6 by DraftKings. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds? Or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick6 app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick6 credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick6. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.com, draftkings.com/promos. And as part of this Pick6 sponsorship, Ryan, we're going to play a little game. We're going to use the RotoWire Picks page. We also have the RotoWire Picks app, but I'm not going to pull out my phone on camera here right now. I'm going to do it all on the screen so nobody knows that I'm looking at all the answer key right behind the camera here. But we're going to let's look at just tonight's game to give listeners the most chance of actually using these, although most of our listeners, I would imagine, are just going to laugh at everything we got wrong here. But the night game is a battle of LA between the Angels and the Dodgers. So give me one pick to start things off. We'll go back and forth. We'll make a set of 6 picks here about this Angels-Dodgers game.
Yeah, so the Dodgers get to face Zach Plesac tonight, who, yes, he actually had a decent start for the Angels, his first time out, but he's still Zach Plesac, even in his good run there with the Guardians. Not a guy who's going to miss bats. He's going to give up hits. He's going to give up a lot of home runs. So I like attacking the Dodgers or attacking Plesac with the Dodgers tonight. And very intrigued by that Shohei Ohtani over on 8.5 fantasy points via DraftKings. Shohei has averaged 11.8 points on DraftKings per game this season. Over his last 5 games, he's scored at least 16 points in all those games. He's got an extra base hit in 6 straight games, and I would bet on that continuing tonight against Zach Plesac.
Yeah, I am going to pick on Zach Plesac as well. I'll say that he gets fewer than 15.5 outs, so that's fewer than 5 innings. I just keep it very straightforward. Zach Plesac, one of the weaker starters in baseball right now, I would imagine, given that he is only just now getting into this Angels rotation of all teams, and he's going against literally the best lineup in baseball, at least according to WRC+. Dodgers at 122 on the season, so I would bet on the Dodgers to knock a whole bunch of pitchers out before the end of the 5th inning. And actually, with this line at 15.5, Plesac could even get you an even 5 and out. I don't think he's going to do much more than that. So very easy for me to take less than 15.5 outs for Plesac. You going to pick on him again for your next pick?
I sure am. Poor Zach Plesac. What did he do to deserve this? Going to Freddie Freeman now. And I'm going to take the over on his fantasy points too. That is set at 6.5. And Freddie Freeman has averaged 8.9 fantasy points per game in DraftKings this season. If you just zero in on June, he's been fantastic. He's averaged 11.3 fantasy points this month. So far in June, a 10.85 OPS and 5 home runs. It's pretty easy to see that scenario continuing with his hot month against, yes, Zach Plesac. So I'm taking the over on fantasy points for Freddie Freeman.
I will also pick on Zach Plesac. Sorry, Zach. Just had the misfortune of starting the night game during this segment here. Is it too crazy to take more than half a hit for Kevin Biggio? I guess here's the question. Are we picking on Zach Plesac that much? Kevin Biggio is somebody I'm vaguely interested in just because he's moved to the Dodgers. Maybe I should wait until they've had a chance to actually work their magic with him. But I don't think it's that hard to ask him to get 1 hit against Zach Plesac of all people. Maybe this is a bad idea just because Biggio's an on-base guy and maybe he'll get 2 walks and not get a hit at all. But I think if it's just at 0.5, I think more than half a hit is good enough for me.
Yeah, I'm going to double up on Freddie Freeman here. I'm also going to take the over on 1.5 total bases. If he's going to get the over 6.5 fantasy points, as I mentioned with my last pick, chances are he's probably going to get the over on the 1.5 total bases. Keep in mind that does not include walks, so he will have to get that on just hits alone. But given the numbers I already mentioned with Freddie Freeman, particularly in June, I think that's a pretty easy call there.
All right, and I'll wrap things up by, should I do anything pro Angels? Not against Tyler Glasnow. I don't think I can do that. I guess we haven't actually picked anything about Glasnow himself here, so I could go in that direction. But I think I might actually go with more than half of a run plus hit plus RBI for Jason Hayward, who, as Uncle Ted mentions in the chat here, has been moving up the order a little bit with Mookie Betts hurt. Maybe interesting as a pickup in a few more leagues than he was before. Just keep on riding that pick on Zach Plesac train. That's going to be it for our Pick 6 selections. Thank you, DraftKings Pick6, for your sponsorship. Remember, we've got that new Picks app, the RotoWire Picks app, for all your pick needs. Back here with the pickups. Let's move to the budget buys of the week. Where are we going to go with the first pitcher, Ryan?
Yeah, someone that was mentioned in the chat earlier, Landon Knack of the Dodgers again, sticking with the Dodgers theme. He's actually rostered in 23% of Yahoo League, so that's a little much for your budget buys, I guess. But those rostership rates on Yahoo are a little skewed because he started yesterday. So those people that are streaming are a lot of them, they're going to be picking up Landon Knack specifically for that. I suspect that rostership rate will be down pretty significantly in the next day or two. But I do like Landon Knack. Could get a longer look with both Buehler and especially Yamamoto looking like he's going to be sidelined for a while. 2.10 ERA, 0.94 whip, and 5 starts. Not a hard thrower, doesn't miss a ton of bats, so he doesn't have the prototypical upside that we see with a lot of the Dodgers hurlers, but I think he's a perfectly solid pitcher, solid pitching prospect, and obviously he's going to be backed by a good offense. So I like Landon Knack, particularly if he's available in your deeper leagues.
Yeah, anybody who has a chance to make a run of starts at the back of that Dodger rotation is interesting to me. I'm going to dig deep for a starter here. Mitch Spence of the Oakland Athletics. I'm going to mention him here partially because it seems like every other Oakland A's starter gets the occasional mild amount of interest. The park really helps. So if anybody looks like anything in that Oakland rotation, you've got A, a great pitcher's park, and B, no competition for your job. And so we've maybe talked up Luis Medina in the past. I don't know if we have specifically talked up Joey Estes or Hogan Harris, but I've heard people every now and then say, is there anything there? Mitch Spence, if there's any fans out there, I just haven't seen them yet, and maybe there shouldn't be too many, but through 7 starts and 11 relief appearances this season in his rookie season, 3.86 ERA, 121 whip, nothing exciting, but totally adequate. And the ERA estimators say that's what he deserves, a 3.81 SIERA, 3.82 xFIP. This looks like a perfectly fine, slightly above average pitcher. He gets there through avoiding walks. He's got a 6% walk rate, and through keeping the ball on the ground, not at an elite level, but 49% ground ball rate is strong. He doesn't miss a lot of bats, but a 19.7% strikeout rate is enough that I'm not worried that he is just a complete pitch to contact guy who can't miss any bats. So Mitch Spence would not be getting excited for, but he's got the possibility for a couple interesting starts. His next 2 starts would be versus the Angels, if our projected starters grid holds true. I'm not trying to sell you too much on this 26-year-old rookie, but again, the circumstances in Oakland, you just got to be pretty decent to stick around for a while, and Spence looks at least pretty decent.
Yeah, somewhat related to Oakland, it's looking like Chase Silseth might return to the Angels rotation next week, and if he does, that start could come against the A's. Results on his rehab assignment have not been great, but keep in mind he's at AAA Salt Lake. It's a very difficult place to pitch, and he has still been missing bats, even with the ERA pretty bloated there. Had 12 strikeouts in 8 innings prior to hurting that elbow, and also showed some promise in 2023, missed well over a bat per inning. Not super exciting, but Chase Silseth could get an extended run in the Angels rotation. He has shown glimpses of upside in the past, particularly from a bat missing perspective. So in your deeper leagues, I think he's a roll of the dice, particularly if he comes back this next week with a nice matchup against Oakland.
Yeah, worth a look there for sure. I've been a Chase Silseth guy at several different times. It hasn't quite actually worked out yet, but I will continue to be a Chase Silseth guy until I learn how to say his name properly. Moving on to my next pitcher, Nate Pearson. In the year 2024, I'm still interested in Nate Pearson, or maybe I'm interested in Nate Pearson again. He's now a reliever in Toronto, and he's near the back of the bullpen. He actually got that save the other day. I believe Chad Green had pitched earlier in the game, and then Jimmy Garcia was pitching in the ninth and had to leave, and it was Pearson who finished it off. I believe it's the second save of the season for Pearson, the third of his career. His season-long numbers certainly aren't dominant. A 4.13 ERA and a 1.38 WHIP. Those aren't very good. The ERA estimators say he deserves a good deal better, though, especially Sierra down at 3.24. Strikeout rate of 28% should be enough to offset a walk rate that's just shy of 10%. And with Pearson, he's somebody who was such an elite prospect before his debut. I think it was at the 2020 season. I remember being incredibly excited for both Nate Pearson and Mackenzie Gore. Does that sound right? They were about to just tear it up. And the thought was, man, in this shortened season, we could see them right away. They could dominate the whole time. We don't need to worry about workload concerns. Let's go. Well, didn't really work out for either of those guys. Gore's gotten back on track as a quality starting pitcher now a few years later. Too many injuries for Pearson for that to happen. But I don't ever want to forget about elite prospect pedigree, even 4 or 5 years later. Somebody who was supposed to be as good as Pearson once was supposed to be. Some version of that is still in there after the injuries. And again, he's doing some things right, still getting a good amount of whiffs, and he's pretty close to save situations. I mentioned earlier that I don't want to project anybody on a bubble team for saves beyond the end of July. I think there's a very real chance that it's Nate Pearson who leads the Blue Jays in saves in August and September. I don't know if I'd say more than 50% chance, but a very real chance. So as far as speculative reliever ads, why not get someone with his kind of pedigree?
Another speculative ad. I'm going to close out this section for us. David Festa, the minor league pitcher in the Twins organization. 4th, I believe, in all of minor league baseball in strikeouts this season with 87 over 59 and 2/3 innings. Control is not great with David Festa, but always been a huge bat misser at every level so far. And you look at that Twins rotation, Simeon Woods Richardson has been surprisingly good. I don't know how much of a believer I am in him ultimately. I could see David Festa ultimately taking that spot eventually. And also, Bailey Ober's got a pretty lengthy injury history. I don't want him to get hurt, but very well could. Pitchers get hurt, especially pitchers who have been hurt in the past. They tend to get hurt again. So I think David Festa, as far as a deep league stash, totally worth it, especially from a strikeouts upside perspective.
Yeah, definitely. If you're looking to get ahead of the next big FAAB weekend, David Festa could be the guy who generates that kind of spending. So if you can stash him, now's a good time. We will get to our budget hitters right after this message from Home Run Forecast. Can certain weather conditions lead to more home runs? The atmosphere can affect how far a baseball flies by 20%. Home Run Forecast measures the weather conditions at a ballpark to tell us if the atmosphere is good or bad for ball flight during a game. An index value that rates the air is created for each game and ballpark and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10. Home Run Forecast Premium site offers index values by the hour for each game, 24-hour forecasts, wind direction and speed, and even whether the roof will be open at certain stadiums. Home Run Forecast is offering a special for the start of the baseball season. You can get access to the premium site for the entire season for only $28, a savings of nearly 30%. Go to homerunforecast.com/RotoWire now to sign up. And we're back here on the Saturday FAAB edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Moving on to our budget hitters. I'll start this one off with someone who was getting plenty of mention in the chat at the start of our show. Austin Martin seems to have his fans. He is someone who I actually picked up in the RotoWire Stake League, I believe, on Thursday, replacing Johan Rojas, who was sent to the minors. And I think that I might be getting a similar level of production from Austin Martin. Was once a pretty highly rated prospect. He was the 5th overall pick by the Blue Jays back in the 2020 draft. Hasn't totally put it all together. Was more of a middle infielder, I think, back then. Now he's an outfielder with some speed and a questionable bat. But he definitely does have that speed. 6 steals, 37 games is pretty solid numbers. He's been playing regularly recently, batting 9th, but playing nearly every day against righties. He's a right-handed hitter, but his last off day came against a lefty. guess the Twins have other platoon guys to get in there or something, but he's getting time at second base and center field and left field, making a decent amount of contact. A 19% strikeout rate is leading to a respectable 268 batting average. The issue with Martin, he has no more barrels than you do, listener. He's got a 0% barrel rate, so don't expect any power, really. He's got 1 home run and no barrels this year. Can't be too many guys for whom that's been true. Would not expect any pop again, but decent amount of speed and a decent enough batting average. That's going to, fill the kind of spot that a Johan Rojas type was filling on your team. So I would only really go after him in leagues deep enough where that profile of player is interesting, but I think Martin is the current example of that player.
Yeah, and the current example of a Rockies decent but not great prospect that's getting some run now is Michael Toglia. Most recent stint in the majors, 780 OPS, a couple home runs, and 12 RBI in 15 games. He's started all 15 of those games since being promoted and has batted 4th or 5th each of the last 6 games for the Rockies. Look back at his minor league track record at AAA. He's got a 908 OPS and 32 home runs over 125 AAA games. Strikeouts are a major issue for Michael Toglia. Even in the minors, he hasn't really hit for a ton of average. You are hoping that he basically just keeps his head above water in that regard, but he's got some big raw power. He plays at Coors Field. He's got dual eligibility. Not a perfect player, but in your deeper leagues, I think he's viable for sure.
Yeah, I will go to another Rocky, Hunter Goodman, one of those, is he a catcher, is he not a catcher type prospects, just like Ben Rice, who we mentioned at the start of the show. Hunter Goodman has actually been up with the Rockies for a little bit and has been mostly playing outfield and mostly not playing well either. He's getting some opportunities at catcher now with Elias Diaz out with a calf injury. And actually, it's now been 5 appearances at catcher for Goodman. And if you're in a league which uses 5 as the in-season threshold for adding new positional eligibility, suddenly Goodman is on the map and is interesting. I think if you're in a league where he's still merely an outfielder, don't think I'd go get him just because he hasn't really done all that much yet. And by all that much, I mean he's hitting 191, 683 OPS, does have 6 homers in 29 games. So he's shown some pop alongside pretty poor plate discipline. But if there's anything in his profile, and there is some pop, if there's anything at all, and he's eligible at catcher and playing pretty regularly in the outfield even at Coors Field, that's interesting in deeper leagues. So I would go out and add Hunter Goodman anywhere where you need a catcher, and he is eligible as that catcher.
Yeah, Forrest Wall, actually another former Rocky, although never made to the majors with the Rockies, former first-round pick of theirs. I believe he was a second baseman when they took him in the first round many years ago. He's now an outfielder with the Braves, and he started each of the last 2 games against righties since being recalled from AAA Gwinnett. 52 stolen bases each of the last 2 full minor league seasons for Forrest Wall. Got 5 stolen bases in just 21 plate appearances in his brief time at the major league level. I don't expect that he's going to be a long-term answer to their injury issues in Atlanta's outfield, but he's getting some run now and he's got speed. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, Erik. I'm going to say it. Run, Forrest, run.
Nice. Not into a wall, hopefully. We've got just a couple names left. I want to mention one name that we didn't put on here, Orelvis Martinez. We've got a question in chat here from Uncle Ted. Are you all breaking the bank on Orelvis Martinez? Well, we're not even putting him on the outline because he's only started 1 out of 4 games after getting called up. He's back on the bench today, it looks like. Orelvis Martinez is one of the Blue Jays' more exciting prospects, and he did just get the call earlier this week. But if they're not using him, we know that, that old saying, they're not going to call him up to sit him on the bench. Well, that's not actually true. If this call-up happened today, I would absolutely say add Elvis Martinez, and then we would have been in a Heston Kjerstad situation that we were in earlier in the year, where it made all the sense in the world to say, definitely go add this guy. He's one of the team's top prospects, and he's on the team now. Of course you go get him. I would say there's certainly spots where I would advise adding Elvis Martinez, but as of right now, there aren't too many of them. If he's been called up to sit on the bench, I don't know where you add him. You add him only in places where you have the luxury to sit on him for a little bit until he starts playing, and he might just head back to the minors when Bo Bichette gets healthy.
Yeah, I mean, he might be more talented than any of the guys we've talked about today. One of the better power hitting prospects in the minors. Well, he's in the majors now, but I suspect he's going to be sent back to the minors here shortly. Before he made that one start in as 4 games you mentioned, I remember seeing tweets about him getting in extended work on his defense pregame. That doesn't really speak to a lot of faith in his ability to handle a position defensively at the major league level. And I suspect that's why he has only started 1 game so far. So plenty of long-term intrigue with him, but I am not terribly interested in redraft leagues.
Yeah, another player that I'm not sure if we should have thrown on the outline, so I'll mention him now. Luis Matos, he did just get recalled with Mike Yastrzemski hitting the IL. Matos had that 11 RBI weekend early in the season, got a lot of excitement. I think we were interested. I know I liked a guy who makes as much contact as he does, and I thought that we were seeing signs of him adding more things to his game, but instead he was back down in the minors within a couple weeks. I think there are certainly deep leagues where I would want to take a chance on him again because he still has that skill, and I certainly like that skill of a young hitter who makes a lot of contact, but not sure would get too excited there.
Yeah, I think you can take another chance on him in a deeper league. He should get a decent amount of playing time, I would think. I haven't seen a grade on the oblique strain with Mike Yastrzemski, but that's generally more than a longer than a minimum stay on the IL. And Matos, as you mentioned, certainly shown some spark offensively, albeit brief, and still very young, so he could put it all together, not counting on it. But in a deeper league with where you're just taking a flyer, I think he makes sense.
Yeah, and then the final name that I actually did throw on the outline, Miguel Rojas, with Mookie Betts on the IL. Somebody's got to play shortstop for the Dodgers, and it's Miguel Rojas. He's still just Miguel Rojas, so this is in no way a ringing endorsement, but he's fine if he's playing. He's only striking out 9.7% of the time this year, so he's putting enough balls in play that he should give you at least a decent batting average and some counting stats from his amount of playing time, but it's Miguel Rojas, and he's going to head back to the bench eventually. This is a temporary deep league middle infield fill-in, nothing more.
Yep, I think you covered the whole thing there. I mean, he's actually hit decent this year, especially for Miguel Rojas, and he's going to get regular playing time in a good lineup. So if you're in desperate need of a middle infielder, I guess you could do worse.
Yeah. Certainly, there have been times where I've looked at the middle infield wire in deep leagues and not seen a whole lot. So at least a guy who's playing is going to do it in a lot of leagues. That's going to do it for us. Thank you to our sponsor, Pick6. Thank you to our listeners and chatters. Thank you, Ryan. We'll be back next week with more pickups, and I'll be back tomorrow on the Sunday RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast talking about the bubble teams with Frank Amoranti. We'll be back tomorrow on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast brought to you by Pick6.